Today we're bringing together Chicago Muslim leaders as well as interfaith leaders to urge protection of civilians in Aleppo. I'd like to list off the names of the speakers that we'll have in the order that they'll be speaking. The first speaker will be Tabassum Khalid. She's the Executive Director of the Council of Islamic Organizations, Greater Chicago. Then we'll have Reverend Paul Rutgers, the Co-Executive Director of the Council of Religious Leaders of Metropolitan Chicago. We'll then have Hani Atasi, the President of the Syrian American Council Chicago chapter, Safar Zarzour from the Syrian Forum, USA, Dr. Zahir Sahlul from the Syrian American Medical Society, and finally Ahmed Rehab, the Executive Director of the Council on American Islamic Relations on Chicago. It's CAIR-Chicago. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce Tabassum Khalid, the Executive Director of CAIR-GC.
Good afternoon. On behalf of the Council of Islamic Organizations, its board, welcome to this unfortunate time that we need to get together to again talk about Aleppo. The Council is a leading advocate of Muslim community interest throughout Chicagoland and Illinois, and we have families that have settled here from Syria, and many contributing Muslim leaders that are part and parcel of the Chicago community that you will meet today with families that are still in Syria or in other places that took them in. So the Council has been working not only with our elected leaders, but other faith communities to make sure that we are aware of what is going on and to call for cooperation, call for leadership to solve something that is sorely needed, which is to bring the help that Syrians need in Syria and those that have been forced from their home. I'd like to read you a statement from our chair. The world apathy in the face of the potential massacre of thousands of civilians in Aleppo cannot be accepted or understood. The situation in Aleppo is much worse than in Benghazi, where the world did take decisive action to prevent the massacre. The civilians need to be evacuated from the violence and bombings, and we are heartened to hear, encouraged to hear that something is being done, but we want more to be done. We want to make sure that there's follow through the safety of the civilians that remain. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Reverend Paul Rutgers. I'm co-director of the Council of Religious Leaders of Metropolitan Chicago. That's CRLMC. If you confuse it with CILCG, I'm with you. It's often hard to keep track of the alphabets. But it's not hard to keep track. And with sadness, I recall keeping track of the ways that we find ourselves across the faith communities, sharing the concern and the sadness that's going on, sometimes around us, sometimes not too far away. Council of Religious Leaders with some 40 chief leaders of traditional historic faith communities has frequently expressed its concern about what has been happening in the Middle East, and most specifically in Syria. And so today, once again, we come to a place that for many of us feels like home, because we share the God, we share the compassion, we share the concern that now brings us to prayer and to urging that something, God knows something, be done to rescue the people who are trapped or waiting for rescue, and who await then the concern of many of us such as gathered here. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Hani Atazi. I'm the president of the Syrian American Council, the Midwest chapter. Today is a really sad day for the Syrians. Some 150,000 civilians are cramped in two little districts in Aleppo, 6 miles area, and they are awaiting for a mass execution. Recently, the pro-Assad regime backed by Iran and Russian warplanes have attacked Aleppo, and they have gained over the rebels. What happened recently is mass executions. Almost 200 people just got killed today. Mass arrests. Just recently, in the last 2 weeks, we've seen almost 500 young men that have disappeared, and we don't know exactly what their fate is. Activists, aid workers, they are sending out final messages, and we don't know their abouts. We're worried about them. We're worried about all the civilians of 150,000. The fall of Aleppo means it's the fall of the rebels, and also who have led the fight against ISIS, the one that we are leading the fight against. Most rebels in Aleppo are moderates. Aleppo rebels wanted to join the ISIS fight, and they have been fighting ISIS for the longest time. Yet, what's happening, ISIS have been gaining ground. All the Iranians and the Russian warplanes, they're focusing on the rebels, and ISIS had been recently captured in old ancient city of Hama. We are calling on Congress, President Obama and President-elect Trump to do something about this. An evacuation is needed. We are worried about the safety of 150,000 civilians. We're worried about the safety of the activists and the aid worker. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Safa Zamzour. I am the president of Syrian Forum USA, an organization that is focused on supporting civilians that have been impacted in the 6 years war that has been imposed on the Syrian people by their government. I do not say civil war because it is a war that is imposed on those people by a government that has no popular support within its populace. As a result, it is supported by over 50 different Iranian militias, supported by Russian Air Force killing its own people. Yesterday, we received messages from one of our local affiliates called Ihsan for Relief and Development. Their office in Aleppo sent out a message saying they are here. The militias, the Iranian militias are 10 feet away. Please forgive us. We don't know what's going to happen next. We have not heard from these people since. But we know that there has been hundreds of people who have been executed yesterday. We know, and we have letters from girls who sent out on the internet saying, I am going to now commit suicide because I know if I don't, I'm going to be raped in the next 10 minutes because the soldiers are outside of my house. Those are facts that seems the whole world to know about, except those who can make a difference. Our government, elected officials, entities that would be able to save people from this carnage, from this atrocity. We seem to keep saying never again, but it is over and over and over again. Helpless people being slaughtered by governments because of political gains, regional and international, without any regard for the lives of those people. We are gathered here together in Chicago to call on our local, state, federal government to both elected and outgoing to do something, to stop the massacre, as was said a few seconds ago, of perhaps another 150,000 people who are basically cornered within an area of no more than 2 to 3 square miles in Aleppo. And we ask our fellow Chicagoans to respond, to call on their elected officials to do something. Although I have to tell you, I received from local Chicagoans that the switchboard at the White House is not picking up when they are calling to register their protest, nor is anybody responding from the Russian embassy in Washington, D.C. Such is the purposeful deafness that those who have power to do something is. And unless we as people do something about it, we are going to continue to witness massacres, and never again will just be one more time, one more again. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Zahir Sahdul, Z-A-H-E-R, Sahdul, S-A-H-L-O-U-L, the past president of the Syrian American Council. And I want to highlight a few points. The first thing, that what is happening in Aleppo today and in the last 5 months is not a Syrian issue. It is a humanitarian issue that we all, as faith and civic leaders, care about. What is happening in Aleppo is connecting us in Chicago to the people in Aleppo. And there were outpouring of sympathy from organizations and individuals and leaders in Chicago in the last 5 months to the people of Aleppo. We have a visual tonight about Aleppo at 8 p.m. We had an exhibition about the impact of war on Aleppo in Chicago. So Aleppo, what's happening in Aleppo is a Chicago cause. We have the Chicago magazine giving the award to 3 physicians who went to Aleppo a few months ago. So compare this outpouring of sympathy from civic societies and faith groups and leaders from our city and from the United States of America to the disconnect of our political leaders, especially President Obama, who we believe that his legacy will be tarnished by what he did not do in Syria. I had the honor of meeting with him in August of 2013. At that time, on behalf of the Syrian American Medical Society, I delivered a letter to him, and I asked him in person to do what he can, to do what we can as a nation, as a superpower, to protect civilians in Syria, and to prevent bombing of hospitals and schools and food markets, and to prevent ethnic cleansing in Syria. And I told him in person, your legacy, Mr. President, will be determined by what you do in Syria. And that was in August 2013. At that time, we had only 1 million Syrian refugees and only 50,000 people killed in Syria. Nowadays, we have 5 million Syrian refugees, and we have 500,000 people who were killed in Syria and 12 million people internally displaced in Syria. More than 750 doctors and nurses were killed in Syria. More than 350 hospitals were bombed. There are new normals that are created in Syria because of the fact that there is no accountability, that Assad regime and Iran and Russia have been doing these war crimes every day without accountability. They're doing it with impunity. So we had more than 168 use of chemical weapons in Syria. We had the siege used as a tactic by the Syrian government to starve population and depopulate areas. We had children dying because of siege and starvation. We have 10,000 people who died under torture in Syria, and this is all tolerated. So what surprises me today as a Syrian American, as a person from Chicago, is the surprise that we had from some political leaders, including the Security Council members today, who had an emergency session about what is going on right now in Aleppo, about the genocide in Aleppo. They were expecting that, and they knew that this is happening, and they were watching it from distance. And they were watching all the videos and the pictures and the stories of Bana al-Abid, of Dr. Omar, of the children who are dying in Aleppo because there is no health care, and they did not do anything to prevent the genocide. And now they are acting as if it's a surprise to them that we had another 100 or 200 people killed in Aleppo. It is shame on humanity and shame on our political leaders. I want to highlight the fact that we are asking, though, for evacuation of civilians, the remaining civilians in Aleppo, the 40 or 50,000 people who are crammed in very small areas in Aleppo, who have bombs falling on them every day, the doctors and the nurses who are scared to get out from the hospital because they can be killed, who are feeling threatened in their life. There was an incident a couple of days ago that militia associated with Assad went into an old hospital and they killed everyone who was in this hospital. And we believe that doctors and nurses and journalists in Aleppo will have the same fate if they are not evacuated. So this is a priority, and of course the other priority to provide humanitarian assistance to the population there. And let me just add and end with this point that what's happening in Aleppo is not a Syrian issue, is not a Muslim issue. This is a humanitarian issue that is affecting our lives here. The anti-refugee sentiment, the xenophobia, the Islamophobia, the anti-immigrant sentiment, the rise of extreme right is all connected to what's happening in Syria. The terrorism that we are seeing is all connected to what's happening in Syria. Terrorists right now are rejoicing and they are happy because they know that they will have much easier way to recruit followers because they will tell them that the West have betrayed the people of Aleppo and we can provide something else. So I hope that we all, as civic society, as faith leaders, will take these things seriously and will pressure this administration and the next administration to end the genocide in Syria and fulfill the aspirations of the Syrian people. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Ahmed Rahab, A-H-M-E-D, R-E-H-A-B. I'm the Executive Director of the Council on American Islamic Relations. We tend to wait until after tragedies have ended and have become history, begin to study the history and marvel at how ghastly and how intense and how terrible the murders were. It wasn't until after World War II had ended that we fully understood the calamity, the human rights calamity and the war crimes that were committed against civilians. It wasn't until after Bosnia had ended that we began to understand Srebrenica and the mass graves and the mass executions of all males of that city. It wasn't until after Rwanda had ended that we began to understand how terrible that crisis was and that we could have done something about it. Here we're living through a crisis and it is playing out as we speak. It is not fully history yet. We are living history and making history, and we have an opportunity to change the course of history if we decide to act together. We know what is at stake. Human lives, innocent human lives. This isn't about politics. This is about saving children, saving women, saving the elderly, saving villagers and townspeople from a certain death. We study Anne Frank in elementary school, in high school. It is part of our education. The story of Anne Frank is. It is part of our consciousness. Not because she was an amazing writer, which she was, able to capture certain emotions in her memoirs, which she was able to do. It's not just about her as a person, but what she represented. What she represented in terms of this raw human emotion of knowing that a certain soldier, a certain battalion is going to knock on these doors, and then she and her family will be pulled out and to a certain death. And writing about the apprehension as such, and the hope still in the goodness of humanity. But this story is meaningless if it is studied just as a historical anecdote and not a reality that is being repeated and can't be repeated. It is meaningless if we don't learn from it and prevent the next Anne Frank from going to her death. Today in Aleppo, there are many Anne Franks. And they are on Facebook. And they are posting their final messages, still filled with hope, asking the world, save us, do something before it is too late. Some have already died, have been pulled out and raped and then killed. Some are still living and hoping for salvation. Let us save the Anne Franks of today. Let us not repeat history. Never again means never again, not time and time again. This gathering is what this call is all about. And there's still an opportunity. Our voices will remain, even if they are solitary voices, to remind the world and our elected officials who have the greatest ability to change the course of history. Time will judge you. History will judge you. Thank you very much.